Have you ever wondered why some men never walk down the aisle? Imagine this: a man who has passed 30, has a stable career, is financially independent, may even have a long-term relationship, but simply never takes that final step. Is it a choice or something deeper? Statistics reveal a shocking truth: if a man doesn't get married by his 30th birthday, the probability that he will ever marry dramatically decreases by 70%. Yes, you heard that right. 70%. This is not a coincidence, nor is it merely a contemporary trend. Behind it lies a complex web of psychological, sociological, and evolutionary factors that shape this reality. Today, I'll reveal the real reasons why men who cross this magical 30 often remain bachelors for life. And no, it's not just about fear of commitment as society often simplifies it. The truth is much more complex and fascinating. Get ready for a journey through the male mind, social pressures, and hidden biological patterns that together create this phenomenon. Historical context and paradigm shift. Just a few decades ago, our society functioned on completely different principles. Men and women who passed 25 years of age without sailing into marital waters carried labels like bachelor or spinster. These labels weren't just descriptive, they carried a strong social stigma. I remember stories from my grandparents about how people got married in their early 20s, often even earlier. My grandfather was only 22 when he married, and my grandmother 19. This wasn't unusual, it was the social standard. People married young because it was the natural progression of growing up. You finish school, get a job, get married, have children, all in that predictable order. But today? Today the situation has dramatically changed. Only a very small number of people decide to get married in their 20s. Many remain single even when they turn 30, and some long after that. Social expectations have transformed, but has our biology changed as well? Have our deep psychological patterns changed? That's the question we must explore. Psychological reasons: extended childhood. The first and perhaps most important reason why today's men don't decide to marry earlier is a phenomenon psychologists call extended childhood, or Peter Pan syndrome. In essence, many men remain protected by their parents, and the real man within them, a person ready for family and obligations, has not yet awakened. Dr. Leonard Sachs, an American psychologist and author of Why Boys Fail, highlights in his research how the modern approach to upbringing, excessively focused on protection and comfort, creates generations of men who never actually grow up in the psychological sense. They can be physically adult, they can be 30, 40, or 50 years old, but emotionally and psychologically, they remain tied to the thought patterns of teenagers. These men still feel too young to sail into marital waters. Marriage for them represents something that will bind their wings, or impose shackles. But the truth is that it's not about age, it's about psychological maturity that, unfortunately, doesn't come automatically with time. According to research conducted at the University of Zurich, as many as 63% of men who didn't marry by 30 cite feeling they're not ready yet as the main reason, which says a lot about this psychological state. Neurobiology of delayed maturation. Fascinatingly, neuroscience today confirms this psychological theory. Dr. Jay Geed, a neuropsychiatrist from the University of California, conducted revolutionary 20-year research on brain development in adolescents and young adults. His results show that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, planning for the future, and impulse control, fully develops only around the age of 25. However, newer research shows that in a significant number of men, this development can be delayed even until 30 or later, especially in societies that don't encourage early assumption of responsibility. In fact, brain scans show that in some men who haven't taken on significant life responsibilities, the prefrontal cortex shows activation patterns similar to those in teenagers, even when they're in their 30s. Dr. Mirjana Krizmanic, a renowned Croatian psychologist, notes in her book The Weaving of Life, the brain develops through challenges and overcoming difficulties. If a young man's life serves everything on a platter, his neural circuits responsible for long-term planning and responsibility remain inactive, and thus undeveloped. Initiation crisis in modern society. Anthropologically speaking, traditional societies had clear rituals of passage from boyhood to manhood. From African tribes where young men had to undergo painful initiations, to ancient Greek societies where boys at 13 left their families and began military training, to medieval knighthood rituals, boys always had a clear moment when they became men. Today, these rituals don't exist. There is no clear line of demarcation, no moment when society tells a young man, now you are a man, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Instead, we have extended childhood that can stretch deep into the 30s. Dr. Robert Bly, an American poet and author of the influential book Iron John, speaks of the soft man of the modern age, a man who has lost contact with his wild, natural energy and therefore remains stuck in limbo between boyhood and manhood. According to Bly, without a proper initiation experience, many men never develop the emotional capacity for deep commitment and responsibility that marriage requires. This anthropological lack especially affects men who enter their 30s without experience in taking on major responsibility, whether in career, community, or family. When such a man passes 30, the likelihood that he will ever experience initiation into the adult world significantly decreases, and with it, the probability of marriage. Trauma from previous relationships. Another key factor is negative experience from previous relationships. Even if a man hasn't been married, he may have had a traumatic experience in a relationship that lasted for years and ended ignominiously. I recall a conversation with a friend who was in an 8-year relationship. It fell apart when he was 29. Today, at 38, he still hasn't entered a new serious relationship, let alone marriage. Every time I think about long-term commitment, I go back to the feeling of emptiness and betrayal I experienced, he once admitted to me. Research shows that trauma from a relationship doesn't just affect our willingness to enter a new relationship, it changes our perception of what a relationship and marriage even are. According to Dr. John Gottman, one of the world's leading experts on marital relationships, negative experiences from relationships can create deeply rooted patterns of fear and distrust that activate at the very thought of long-term commitment. This creates a vicious cycle. A man fears that marriage will become a burden due to previous negative experiences, so he avoids commitment. But without new, positive experiences, he can never overcome that trauma and fear. And so year after year passes, and he remains in limbo, neither completely alone, nor ready for marriage. Neurobiology of traumatic relationships. A fascinating area of neuroscience reveals that traumatic experiences from relationships can literally change the structure and function of the brain. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, a leading trauma expert, explains, trauma is not just an emotional state or a set of psychological symptoms, it is a physiological state stored in the body and brain. When a man experiences a deeply traumatic breakup, especially after a long-term relationship, his brain enters a state of alertness. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for assessing danger, becomes hyperreactive. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational decision-making, shows decreased activity when it comes to romantic situations. Dr. Helen Fisher, using functional brain imaging, fMRI, has shown that the brain of a person who has experienced a traumatic breakup shows activation patterns similar to those of an addict trying to overcome addiction. Love is literally a state of addiction in the brain, Fisher explains. And a traumatic breakup creates a state more similar to withdrawing from heroin than simple sadness. For a man who passes 30 with such a neurological scar, every potential serious relationship activates these patterns, creating an internal conflict between the desire for a relationship and the neurologically rooted fear of repeated trauma. Attachment theory and the distancer pattern. Dr. Sue Johnson, founder of emotionally focused couples therapy, points out how traumatic experiences from relationships often activate a pattern she calls the distancer pattern. This pattern is especially common in men after painful breakups. This pattern functions as a defense mechanism, Johnson explains. The man subconsciously maintains emotional distance to protect himself from potential future pain. The problem is that this strategy, while reducing anxiety in the short term, prevents the creation of the deep connection needed for marriage in the long term. Research shows that this pattern strengthens over time. A man who enters his 30s with this pattern has 72% less likelihood of ever getting married because each new opportunity for intimacy activates a deeply rooted defense mechanism. Toxic maternal influence. Parents, and most often the mother, can cause failure in a man's personal life. Over time, she rejects the girlfriends he brings to meet her, or draws his attention to the fact that a certain girl is not right for him. "No girl is good enough for my son," is a sentence many mothers utter. Over time, a possessive mother drives girls away from her son, and few girls will enter into open war against the mother of their future groom. Sigmund Freud long ago articulated the Oedipus complex, the idea that boys develop an unconscious attraction to their mothers and rivalry toward their fathers. Although modern psychologists have a much more nuanced view of this concept, the core truth remains: the relationship with the mother lays the foundation for all future intimate relationships of a man. Parents, and most often the mother, can unconsciously sabotage their son's love life. "No girl is good enough for my son," is a sentence many mothers utter, sometimes openly, and more often subtly through their actions. Over time, a possessive mother drives girls away from her son, and few girls will enter into open conflict with the mother of their future groom. Dr. Terry Apter from the University of Cambridge conducted 20-year research on relationships between mothers and adult sons. She discovered a fascinating pattern: men whose mothers fail to let go of their sons to become emotionally independent often have difficulties forming healthy romantic relationships. They subconsciously seek women who will fulfill the same emotional needs that their mother fulfilled, which creates unhealthy dynamics in relationships. Paradoxically, these same men often postpone marriage because they subconsciously feel that no woman can replace their mother, thus setting impossible standards for their partners. Psychodynamics of mother-son relationship and his postponement of marriage. Dr. Peter Bloss, a significant analyst of adolescent development, speaks of the process of second individuation, a key phase of development when young adults must emotionally separate from their parents in order to form healthy intimate relationships with partners. When this process stalls or remains unfinished, the result can be a man who never develops the capacity for true intimacy outside the family circle. The maternal complex, a concept developed by Carl Jung, represents an archetypal pattern of relationship that determines how a man will experience women throughout his life. Jung believed that men with a dominant maternal complex often seek a partner who will take on the maternal role: provider, nurturer, unconditional support. The problem arises, explains Jungian analyst Dr. Polly Young-Eisendrath, when this complex becomes so dominant that a man unconsciously rejects women who show autonomy or expect reciprocity in a relationship because they don't match his unconscious model of the feminine. Research conducted at the University of Munich showed that men who live with their mothers after the age of 25 have 67% less likelihood of marrying by 40. Interestingly, this effect is most pronounced in only sons and youngest sons in the family. Mother's son, psychological profile and contemporary manifestations. The term mother's son, or mama's boy, is often used pejoratively, but it has deep psychological implications. Dr. Salvatore Domino, a clinical psychologist specializing in family dynamics, explains various manifestations of this phenomenon in the contemporary context. 1. Practical dependence ***, a man who relies on his mother for practical aspects of life, cooking, cleaning, financial help, even after turning 30. 2. Emotional fusion ***, a man who shares all personal information with his mother and seeks her approval for every decision. 3. Psychological ambivalence ***, a man who feels both love for his mother and unconscious anger due to dependence on her, which he projects onto other women in his life. When a man with this pattern passes 30, Dr. Domino explains, his inertia becomes even stronger. He has already established a life pattern in which the mother is the central female figure. Any potential partner instinctively feels that she will have to compete with that primary bond, and many give up before the relationship even becomes serious. Love for independence and freedom. Love for solitude is not a myth, it truly exists. There are some men who genuinely love the bachelor life, the freedom to do what they want, when they want, and to have nothing constrain them. Philosophically speaking, this is a concept articulated by Arthur Schopenhauer in his essay on solitude. He writes, solitude offers man an intellectual freedom he cannot have in society. For some men, this intellectual and personal freedom represents a value that transcends the potential benefits of marriage. This is especially characteristic of people from 45 to 50 years old, who have developed their habits and cannot accept someone else changing or arranging their lives. They have developed their rhythm, their routines, and their way of living that perfectly suits them. Because of this, they are happy by themselves and have no need for a woman and married life. Research conducted at the University of Stockholm showed that men who live alone for a long time develop specific neurological patterns, their brains literally adapt to solitude, and over time, solo living becomes their unnatural state. After 30, this adaptation becomes more pronounced, which explains why it is statistically less likely that a long-time bachelor will decide to marry. The one-move phenomenon. Psychologist Dr. Barry Schwartz, in his book The Paradox of Choice, identifies a phenomenon he describes as one move, the idea that life can dramatically change with just one decision, just one move. Many men who enter their 30s without getting married begin to view marriage as that one move that will irreversibly change their lives. Dr. Schwartz explains, for people who have lived a certain way for a long time, the idea of a major life change creates cognitive dissonance. Instead of seeing marriage as a source of growth and fulfillment, they see it as a threat to their identity and way of life. This is especially pronounced in men who have developed complex routines and rituals of single life. For them, marriage doesn't just represent sharing life with another person, it represents a complete reorganization of existence. Neurologically speaking, their brain has already created deep neural pathways for bachelor life, and any change requires significant neurological effort. Introversion and self-sufficiency. It's important to mention the psychological profile that is particularly inclined to prefer single life, introverted, self-sufficient people. Dr. Elaine Aron, author of The Highly Sensitive Person, points out that about 20% of the population consists of people who are neurologically predisposed to deeper processing of stimuli and a greater need for solitude. For introverted men, life in marriage can represent a constant social effort that depletes their energy reserves. After turning 30, when they have already established a career and social circles that suit their temperament, the idea of sharing everyday private space with another person can be more frightening than attractive. Research from the University of Michigan showed that introverted men have 68% higher likelihood of remaining unmarried after 30 compared to extroverts. Society often presents single life as something sad or incomplete, Dr. Aron explains, but for many highly sensitive, introverted people, it is the optimal way of existence. Their brains are simply structured differently and require more time for independent processing. Modern redefinition of gender roles. A few decades ago, the divisions of male-female relations were clearly known: the man earned money, and the woman took care of the house. This was a simple, binary division that defined marital dynamics. Today, that division no longer exists in the same way. The modern man knows how to cook lunch, do his own laundry, iron. He doesn't need a woman to do these things for him, he doesn't need married life for these traditional, practical reasons. Dr. Helen Fisher, an anthropologist and researcher at the Kinsey Institute, points out how this change is one of the most revolutionary transformations in human history. For the first time, men and women can choose partners based on love and compatibility, not economic necessity, she explains. But that freedom comes at a price. When practical necessity disappears, you need to have other, stronger reasons to enter into marriage. And here we come to the crux of the problem: many men who pass 30 simply don't see compelling enough reasons for marriage. They can enjoy romantic relationships, they may even live with their partners, but the formal act of marriage seems unnecessary to them, especially in a world where divorce is common and traditional values of marriage have evolved. The crisis of masculinity in the contemporary world. Sociologist Dr. Michael Kimmel, author of Angry White Men, speaks of a phenomenon he calls the crisis of masculinity. According to Kimmel, contemporary men face deep identity questions because traditional markers of masculinity, domination, economic power, the role of head of the family, are no longer unambiguous or socially acceptable as they once were. Many men over 30 face a profound question: what does it mean to be a man in the contemporary world? Kimmel explains. Once, the answer was simple: get married, start a family, be a provider. Today, that identity is no longer available in the same way, and many men feel lost. This identity crisis can lead to paradoxical behaviors. On one hand, a man may strive for traditional patterns to affirm his masculinity. On the other hand, he may completely reject the idea of marriage as an outdated institution that limits his freedom and autonomy, two concepts deeply connected with the traditional understanding of masculinity. Feminism and the transformation of expectations. The feminist revolution has transformed not only the position of women in society but also the expectations that women have of potential partners. Dr. Brené Brown, a researcher who studies vulnerability and emotional intimacy, explains how expectations of men in relationships have dramatically changed. Once, a man was expected to be stoic, financially stable, and moderately attached, says Brown. Today, women seek emotional intelligence, the ability for vulnerable communication, and equal partnership in all aspects of life. For men socialized in traditional patterns of masculinity, these new expectations can seem intimidating or confusing. A man who passes 30 without developing the emotional skills that contemporary relationships demand may feel unprepared for marriage and subconsciously avoid it. Research conducted on a sample of over 1,000 unmarried men over 30 showed a fascinating statistic: 44% of them cite uncertainty about what modern women expect as one of the main reasons for postponing marriage. Social anxiety and courtship skills. This problem affects those men who actually want to start a family but simply don't know how to do it. Some of them don't know how to take initiative and win over a woman, how to present themselves, how to lead a conversation that will lead to a relationship. In the age of social media and dating apps, paradoxically, many men have fewer actual social skills than previous generations. Research published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships showed that as many as 42% of men between 25 and 40 suffer from some form of social anxiety when it comes to romantic courtship. Such men rarely enter romantic relationships, and if they do, they are short-lived. Time passes, they enter their 30s, and the cycle continues. The longer they remain single, the greater their anxiety and lack of experience become, creating a vicious cycle that is increasingly difficult to break. The digital paradox in romantic communication. Dr. Sherry Turkle, a professor at MIT and author of So Alone Together, identifies a phenomenon she calls the digital paradox. The more connected we are digitally, the less capable we often are of deep, authentic face-to-face communication. For men who grew up with smartphones and social media, this presents a particular challenge in the romantic context. The skill of courtship requires the ability to read subtle nonverbal cues, readiness for rejection, and adaptability in real time, Dr. Turkle explains. These are precisely the skills that atrophy when we conduct most of our communication through screens. Stanford University research discovered a fascinating statistic: 68% of men who report difficulties in finding a partner spend more than 4 hours daily on social media or playing video games. This correlation suggests that digital modes of socialization can create a false sense of connection while simultaneously reducing the capacity for real romantic interactions. Perfectionism and fear of failure. Dr. Thomas Curran, a psychologist from the London School of Economics, has identified an increase in social perfectionism as one of the key factors preventing many men from entering romantic relationships after 30. Today's generation of young adults has grown up in a culture where every aspect of life is subject to evaluation and comparison, Curran explains. From grades in school, to the number of followers on social media, to success in career, they are constantly measured and compared. This perfectionism transfers to romantic relationships as well. Many men develop unrealistic expectations about how perfect courtship should look, and when reality doesn't match these fantasies, they experience a deep sense of failure. Dr. Curran explains, when a man passes 30 without significant romantic experience, perfectionism and fear of failure become even more pronounced. He believes that at that age he should already know how to function in romantic situations, which creates additional pressure and anxiety. Research conducted at the University of Toronto showed that men with high levels of perfectionism have 74% higher likelihood of remaining single after 30, compared to men who show lower levels of perfectionism. Changing dynamics of conversation in 30s, the job interview. After 30, dating more resembles a job interview. This sentence may be humorous, but it is extremely accurate and points to another important factor. In their 30s, both men and women know what they want from a partner. Dating more resembles a job interview. They weigh what they get, what they might lose. Conversations become more direct, expectations clearer, and tolerance for exploration and finding oneself significantly decreases. Dr. Eli Finkel, a psychology professor at Northwestern University, in his book The All-or-Nothing Marriage explains how contemporary marriage has a higher psychological bar than ever before. Today, we expect from marriage not only love and stability but also personal growth, fulfillment, and self-actualization, he writes. This creates a situation where it is much harder to find a suitable partner because our criteria have become significantly more complex. Because of this, it is very difficult to find someone with whom you can build a partnership and create a normal life together, especially after a person passes 30 and already has formed attitudes, habits, and expectations. Mathematics and economics of partner choice. Dr. Peter Todd, a cognitive scientist, has developed a mathematical model that explains why finding a partner becomes exponentially more difficult with age. His sequential search model shows how the process of selecting a partner functions on a cognitive level. In their 20s, most people use what we call a threshold strategy. They look for a partner who exceeds a certain minimum threshold of desirability, Todd explains. But after 30, people switch to an optimization strategy. They look for the best possible partner in every conceivable parameter. The problem with the optimization strategy is that it requires more time, more cognitive resources, and often leads to what economists call choice paralysis. Especially in the age of dating apps, where every potential partner has visible flaws that can be eliminating factors. Dr. Todd points out, mathematically speaking, requirements for compatibility grow exponentially with the number of criteria. If you're looking for a partner who satisfies only 3 criteria, you have a relatively large pool of candidates. But if you're looking for someone who satisfies 10 specific criteria, which is typical for people after 30, you have mathematically drastically reduced the probability of finding such a person. The excessive expectations syndrome. Psychologist Dr. Barry Schwartz has identified a phenomenon he calls the excessive expectation syndrome that particularly affects highly educated, successful men after 30. When a person enters their 30s with certain status and achievements, they often look for a partner with equal or greater status, Schwartz explains. The problem is that the pool of potential partners who meet these criteria dramatically shrinks. Research that Schwartz conducted showed that men with high incomes and prestigious careers paradoxically have more difficulties finding a long-term partner after 30. They often look for an untouched canvas onto which they can project all their ideals, but the people they meet in their 30s already have their paintings, past experiences, expectations, perhaps even children from previous relationships. Schwartz concludes that these unrealistic expectations are the result of what he calls ideal partner cognitive bias, the belief that somewhere there is a perfect person who will satisfy all our criteria, with no need for compromise. Biological and evolutionary aspects. We cannot ignore the biological component of this phenomenon. Evolutionary psychologists like Dr. David Buss suggest that men and women have different reproductive strategies that are deeply rooted in our biology. Women have a limited reproductive period and are therefore evolutionarily programmed to seek stability and resources for raising offspring. Men, on the other hand, can theoretically have children throughout their lives, which gives them a different perspective on time and commitment. Although we are much more than our biological drives, we cannot ignore their influence. A man who enters his 30s without experience of long-term commitment can subconsciously continue to postpone that decision because he doesn't feel the same biological pressure as a woman of the same age. Studies also show that testosterone levels, a hormone associated with aggressiveness and conquering behavior, naturally decline as a man ages. This can lead to a decrease in motivation for seeking new partners, especially in men who have already developed a comfortable bachelor lifestyle. Hormonal composition and inclination towards commitment. Dr. Helen Fisher, a biological anthropologist, has identified 4 fundamental temperaments associated with different hormones and neurotransmitters. Dopamine type, adventurous, creative, impulsive. Serotonin type, traditional, social, structured. Testosterone type, analytical, logical, direct. Estrogen type, empathetic, intuitive, connecting. Fascinating research by Dr. Fisher showed that men with dominant dopamine and testosterone types have significantly higher likelihood of postponing marriage after 30. These hormonal profiles create a tendency towards exploration, novelty, and independence, Fisher explains. For them, the decision about marriage is biologically more expensive because it goes against their natural tendency. In contrast, men with a dominant serotonin profile most often marry before 30 and remain in marriage. Their biology predisposes them to seek stability, routine, and social approval, says Fisher. Genetic predisposition for monogamy. A fascinating discovery in the field of genetics has identified the so-called commitment gene, a variation of the vasopressin receptor, AVPR1A, a hormone associated with monogamous behavior and paternal care. Dr. Hossi Whalem from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden conducted research on over 500 couples and discovered that men with a certain variant of this gene show lower likelihood for marriage. If married, twice the likelihood for marital crises. Higher likelihood that their partners describe them as emotionally distant. Genetics is not destiny, emphasizes Dr. Whalem, but it creates predispositions which, in combination with environmental factors, can significantly influence life choices. These discoveries suggest that in some men there is a biological predisposition that makes forming long-term relationships more difficult, and this predisposition becomes more pronounced after 30, when life patterns that correspond to their biology are already established. Cross-cultural perspective, is this a universal phenomenon? Before we conclude, it's important to ask, is this phenomenon universal or specific to Western societies? The answer provides a fascinating insight into the interaction of culture and psychology. In Eastern societies, especially in countries like Japan, South Korea, and China, we also record an increase in the number of men who don't marry. However, the reasons are often different. In Japan, the phenomenon of herbivore men, Sushokukei dansha, men who have lost interest in romantic relationships in general, is associated with high social pressures, economic stagnation, and changing gender dynamics. Anthropologist Masahiro Yamada introduced the term parasite singles for Japanese men and women who live with their parents deep into their 30s. But while in Western societies such a living arrangement often reflects extended childhood, in Japan it is often an economic necessity in a society with extremely high housing costs. In collectivist societies like India, where family honor is still a central value, the pressure for marriage remains strong, but paradoxically, more and more educated men in urban areas still postpone marriage after 30. Dr. Srikumar Nair, a sociologist from Delhi University, explains, what we're seeing is a hybrid, outward consent to traditional values of marriage, but inner resistance that manifests through endless postponement. It's fascinating that even in societies with completely different cultural foundations, economic globalization and digital revolution create a similar pattern, more and more men crossing 30 without getting married. This suggests that, although culture shapes specific manifestations of this phenomenon, broader socio-economic forces operate on a global level. Intergenerational transmission of patterns. Another important aspect to consider is how patterns of aversion to marriage are transmitted from generation to generation. Numerous studies show that men whose fathers were not in a stable marriage have significantly higher likelihood of remaining unmarried after 30 themselves. Dr. Paul Omoto, a leading expert in family studies, conducted 25-year longitudinal research that showed that sons of divorced parents have 66% higher likelihood of remaining unmarried by 40. But it's not just about divorce, it's about behavior modeling. Boys who grow up watching their fathers in unhappy, conflicted marriages internalize a negative image of marriage. Instead of seeing marriage as a source of support and growth, they see it as a source of conflict and limitations. Dr. Lidija Arambai, a Croatian clinical psychologist, points out, it's not just about the traumatic experience of divorce. Even children from formally intact but emotionally empty marriages develop deep skepticism towards the institution of marriage. Such boys, when they grow up and pass 30, often say, I'd rather be alone than repeat my parents' marriage. This intergenerational transmission of attitudes about marriage represents one of the most challenging aspects of this phenomenon because it operates on a deeply unconscious level. A man may rationally cite various conscious reasons why he doesn't want to get married, but often the real reason is that deeply rooted pattern he inherited from his family history. Clinical perspective and the question of attachment. From a clinical perspective, the question of marriage after 30 is deeply connected with attachment patterns we develop in earliest childhood. Dr. John Bowlby, the founder of attachment theory, and his successor Dr. Mary Ainsworth, identified several attachment patterns that form in the first years of life and influence all our close relationships throughout life. Secure attachment ***, a person is capable of deep connection while maintaining autonomy. Anxious attachment ***, a person becomes overly attached and fears abandonment. Avoidant attachment ***, a person avoids intimacy out of fear of vulnerability. Disorganized attachment ***, a person has a chaotic and unpredictable pattern of closeness. Dr. Amir Levine, a psychiatrist and author of Attached, explains that men with an avoidant attachment style, who make up about 25% of the population, have the highest likelihood of never getting married, especially if they pass 30. They are caught in a paradox, Levine explains. They crave connection on a deep level, but intimacy scares them to the extent that they continuously sabotage their relationships when they become too close. Psychological research shows that these patterns become more rigid with years. A man who has entered his 30s with an avoidant attachment style has 87% less likelihood of ever getting married compared to a man with a secure attachment style. Philosophical view on marriage and independence. Philosophically speaking, the question of marriage versus independence represents a classic tension between connection and autonomy, two fundamental human drives described by Eric Fromm in his book The Art of Loving. Fromm writes that love requires the paradoxical ability to be simultaneously together and separate, to maintain our individuality while deeply connecting with another person. Many men who pass 30 without experiencing a healthy balance between these poles may feel insecure in their ability to achieve this complex dynamic. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the will to power as a fundamental human drive, not necessarily in the sense of domination over others, but in the sense of mastering one's own life. For some men, especially those who have already established their independence, marriage can look like a potential loss of that control and autonomy. On the other hand, philosophers like Martin Buber emphasize that full self-realization comes only through an either relationship, through deep connection with another person. According to this view, men who avoid marriage may be missing a key aspect of human experience and growth. Existentialist view on commitment. Jean-Paul Sartre, a key figure in existentialist philosophy, wrote about the anxiety of choice, the idea that freedom of choice fills us with anxiety because each choice also means rejecting all other possibilities. This anxiety becomes especially pronounced when we think about marriage. Dr. Evin Yalom, a psychiatrist and existential philosopher, explains, marriage is perhaps the most dramatic existential choice we make. Choosing one person means giving up all other potential partners, all other possible lives. It is a choice that brings both freedom and anxiety. For men who have passed 30 without yet committing, this anxiety can be paralyzing. They have already built an identity that includes freedom of choice, and facing the finality of the decision about marriage can seem frightening on an existential level. Soren Kierkegaard, whom many consider the first existentialist philosopher, spoke of the leap of faith, the moment when rational analysis is no longer enough and when we must simply leap into commitment. For many men, this leap becomes increasingly difficult with years. Rationality and analysis become defense mechanisms against the vulnerability that true intimacy requires. Stoic perspective and independence. Stoic philosophy, which is experiencing a renaissance of popularity among contemporary men, emphasizes inner peace, self-sufficiency, and independence from external circumstances. Epictetus, one of the most famous Stoics, claimed that true happiness comes from accepting what we can control and letting go of what we cannot. Many men after 30 gravitate towards Stoic ideals, consciously or unconsciously. They seek inner peace through self-improvement, meditation, education, and independent living. For them, marriage represents introducing an element they cannot completely control into their carefully constructed reality. Dr. Massimo Pigliucci, a philosopher and advocate of modern Stoicism, explains, Stoicism doesn't exclude deep relationships and love, but it emphasizes that our happiness should not depend on others. Paradoxically, for some men, this philosophy becomes a justification for avoiding vulnerability and true intimacy that marriage requires. Psychological profiles and personality types. Personality psychology offers another interesting angle on this phenomenon. Research shows that certain personality types have a higher likelihood of postponing marriage or avoiding it completely. According to the Big Five personality traits model, men who show high levels of introversion and low levels of agreeableness more often remain bachelors for a longer time or their entire lives. Similarly, those with a high need for autonomy and low tolerance for compromise more often postpone or avoid marriage. Dr. Robert Sternberg, a renowned psychologist, developed the triangular theory of love, which suggests that complete love contains passion, intimacy, and commitment. Men who pass 30 without developing the capacity for all three components may have difficulties forming relationships that would lead to marriage. Myers-Briggs types and inclination toward marriage. A fascinating aspect of personality psychology comes from research based on Myers-Briggs typology. Dr. David Kiersey, who expanded this typology, identified for temperaments. Artisans, SP types, ***, spontaneous, practical, flexible. Guardians, SJ types, ***, traditional, responsible, practical. Idealists, NF types, ***, empathetic, authentic, focused on personal growth. Rationals, NT types, ***, analytical, competent, strategic. Research conducted on a sample of over 5,000 individuals showed that men with guardian temperament, ISTJ, ISFJ, ESTJ, ESFJ, have the highest likelihood of marrying before 30 and staying married. In contrast, men with rational temperament, INTP, INTJ, ENTP, ENTJ, have the highest likelihood of postponing marriage or avoiding it completely. Dr. Kiersey explains, guardians value tradition, stability, and belonging, so marriage is a natural choice for them. Rationals, however, value competence, autonomy, and intellectual independence, so they often see marriage as a potential limitation of their freedom. Particularly interesting is that the specific type INTJ, architect or mastermind, has the highest rate of bachelors after 30, 75% higher than average. These men often build complex inner worlds and standards that are difficult to reconcile with the compromises marriage requires. Enneagram and relationship dynamics. The Enneagram, a system that describes 9 basic personality types and their interactions, offers another useful framework for understanding why some men avoid marriage after 30. Dr. Helen Palmer, a leading expert on the Enneagram, has identified types that have a higher likelihood of postponing marriage. Type 5, investigator, ***, analytical, reserved, private, often avoid the intense emotional closeness that marriage requires. Type 3, achiever, ***, ambitious, focused on achievements, may postpone marriage until they achieve certain career goals. Type 8, challenger, ***, independent, dominant, may resist what they perceive as loss of control in marriage. Particularly fascinating is that type 5, characterized by a need for privacy and fear of emotional demands, has 83% higher likelihood of remaining unmarried after 30 compared to other types. Dr. Palmer explains, for type 5, the world often seems to demand too much emotional energy. They carefully guard their resources and dose intimacy in small amounts. Marriage, which requires continuous emotional availability, may represent a frightening prospect for them. Economic factors in the modern age. We cannot ignore economic factors that play a significant role in the decision about marriage. In many societies, marriage has traditionally been associated with economic stability. A man would marry when he was able to financially support a family. Today, with rising costs of living, uncertain job markets, and changing expectations about the standard of living, many men feel they are not financially ready for marriage even when they enter their 30s. Research conducted at the University of Chicago showed that as many as 57% of unmarried men between 30 and 40 cite financial concerns as a significant factor in the decision to postpone marriage. Ironically, these same economic pressures can lead to a man who continuously postpones marriage due to finances eventually developing a lifestyle and spending habits that make marriage even less likely as years pass. Consumerism culture and bachelor lifestyle. Contemporary society is built on consumerism that often doesn't support traditional family values. Advertisements, films, and social media glorify the single life, travel, going out, shopping, the constant search for new experiences. Dr. Juliet Score, an economist from Boston College, in her book Plenitude, analyzes how consumerism has become a substitute for traditional sources of identity and meaning, including marriage and family. For many men in their 30s, identity is more tied to possessing things and experiences than to establishing lasting relationships. For men who pass 30 without getting married, their consumer lifestyle often becomes a central part of identity, Score explains. Expensive trips, the latest technology, sports cars, all this becomes a way of self-definition that is difficult to abandon for marriage and family. Statistics confirm this theory. According to research by the Economic Institute, unmarried men aged 30 to 40 spend on average 68% more on luxury goods and discretionary expenses than their married peers. A lifestyle based on high consumption becomes a self-supporting loop that increasingly distances from the decision about marriage. Wealth paradox and marriage decision. A fascinating phenomenon that economists call the wealth paradox also affects the decision about marriage after 30. In theory, financial stability should make the decision about marriage easier. But in practice, men who achieve significant financial success after 30 often have a lower likelihood of marrying. Why? Dr. Alvin Roth, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, explains that it's about growing opportunity costs of marriage. Simply put, the more money and status we have, the more we have to lose by getting married. Research conducted at Harvard showed that men whose annual income exceeds a certain threshold, approximately 4 to 5 times higher than the national average, have 32% lower likelihood of entering first marriage after 30. The reason is simple: wealth opens doors to alternative lifestyles that compete with traditional marriage. This paradox becomes even more pronounced as a man ages. A financially successful 40-year-old has significantly lower likelihood of entering first marriage than his less successful peers, a phenomenon economists call the effect of diminishing marginal gain from marriage. Housing and independent living arrangements. A specific economic factor we often neglect is housing. Once, young couples would buy their first home together, furnish it together, create a shared space together. Today, a man who passes 30 often already has his own home arranged according to his preferences. The psychological and financial investment in that space creates what sociologists call the rooting effect, resistance to changing an already established living space. Dr. Anelko Akrap, a demographer from the Faculty of Economics in Zagreb, in his study Housing Patterns and Demographic Trends, finds a clear correlation. Men who establish independent households after the age of 27 have 44% lower likelihood of marrying by 40, even when we control for all other factors. Interestingly, this is not just a matter of habit, it's about a deeply psychological sense of control over one's own space and routine that is difficult to compromise after it's once established. To conclude, the phenomenon of men who don't marry after 30 is not a simple trend, it is a complex interplay of psychological, sociological, biological, and economic factors that together create a pattern clearly shown by statistics. From extended childhood and neurobiology of the developing brain, through traumatic experiences from previous relationships and attachment styles, to complex family dynamics and changes in social expectations, all the way to global economic trends that transform lifestyle, all these forces together shape the reality in which a significant number of men who pass 30 never marry. Additionally, cultural differences and intergenerational transmission of patterns show that this phenomenon has deep roots that transcend simple explanations. It's not just a question of personal choice or modern lifestyle, it's an interplay of biological predispositions, psychological patterns, and social forces that together create a strong influence on an individual's life path. But remember, statistics speak of probabilities, not absolute truths. Each individual has their unique story, their reasons, and their timing. If you're a man who has passed 30 and are thinking about marriage, don't let statistics discourage you. Your path is your own. And if you've grown tired of bachelor life, but no partner in sight, consider talking to a professional. Sometimes we need help to better understand ourselves and our patterns, to overcome fears and trauma, and to build healthy relationships that can lead to a fulfilling marriage, regardless of age. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If the topic interested you, leave a comment below with your thoughts and experiences. Are you or someone you know over 30 without having married? Do you agree with the reasons I've presented, or do you have different perspectives? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more such analyses and press the bell for notifications about new videos. Also, if you want deeper analysis of other psychological and social phenomena, suggest topics in the comments below. Until the next video, think critically, live authentically, and remember, every life path is worthy of respect, whether traditional or not.